So who is LANDFIRE? Well, it is a 15-year-old program now. It is primarily sponsored by the Department of the Interior Office of Wild and Fire and the U.S. Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management Organizations. And the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, is a partner in the LANDFIRE program. We have a small team within the Nature Conservancy. You see their picture on the right. Most of the production for the LANDFIRE program does take place in federal agencies or with federal contractors headquartered out of Sioux Falls at the Aeros Data Center. And you'll see a picture of some of the folks there on the left who are involved in the production. But do remember that this is a partnership of the land management agencies in the federal government as well as the Nature Conservancy. And the purpose of the program is basically to create some sort of quilt or tapestry of data that's available across the nation.
Oh, Jim, I think your mic cut out there.
That basically set forth a number of criteria, and I've boiled this down to 4, a little bit simplified, but it does give you an idea of the operating environment that we're in. And those 4 C's are that LANDFIRE's products will be comprehensive, and that means that all our products will cover every acre in the continental U.S. and Alaska, Hawaii, and now the primary island territories in the South Pacific and in the Atlantic Basin. But it also means we will try to cover all types as well, not just focus on herbaceous or shrub or forest, but all types. LANDFIRE products are required to be compatible, and that means that they are thematically compatible between the different spatial products and also the models and descriptions that have been created. They're also geometrically compatible, so they're the same product, the same projection, everything, so they should be ready to use immediately without really any further pre-processing by the user. LANDFIRE products should also be current as possible under all the operating constraints that we have, that is budget and delivery schedules and when all the supporting information becomes available to create the layers. So we try to be as current as possible. The latest version that's fully complete everywhere is 2014, representing landscape conditions in 2014. And finally, we are also required to be as consistent as possible across time and space and across all versions. And we'll talk about consistency here in just a minute, but those are the design sort of box in which we operate in. And within that box, what we create are 20+ current and historic vegetation layers, fuels layers, condition layers, all 30-meter raster resolution, that is the spatial resolution of the layers. And we've also created 800+ now quantitative state and transition models and descriptions for biophysical settings. And we'll talk about those biophysical settings again later on in the presentation. LANDFIRE has delivered versions that represent conditions in 2001. Sometimes we'll call that LANDFIRE National. That was the first wall-to-wall data set that we created. We updated that, still representing the same time period, 2000, 2001, but with some improvements correcting some problems that we had seen in the original delivery. Also, we updated those products in 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2014. So it is important to remember that those were updates to the original product. We're now engaged in a remap for representing conditions in 2016, okay? And so we'll talk more about what remap means in a moment. But I do need to mention consistent, because what we have learned over time is that we get a lot of feedback, we talk to a lot of people, we find issues, we think we learn as we go along. So we are consistent, but only within the spirit of trying to improve the usability of the product. So you will find differences in the coding schemes sometimes across products. You will find there is some consistency. There are some changes in the processes used to create some of the products. hopefully that improve the product. So if you go to compare different versions, it would be a good idea to work with us to see what kind of changes we may have made that could confound any comparisons that you make. We try to be consistent, but it's impossible to be consistent if we're trying to improve and if we're trying to do the best job possible across every acre in the country, you know, from Puerto Rico to northern Alaska. So keep that in mind about consistency. Okay, so this just gives you an idea of what has been delivered thus far. And what you'll see here is what we call the version control table, which is available on landfire.gov. You can find this, and it's a table that represents all the versions that have been delivered, all the products. So the red arrow on the left, all the rows are pointing, the red arrow is pointing at a particular product, in this case, non-forest vegetation transition database, that was produced in the versions which are shown by the columns. And then each major geographic component, that is the continental US, Alaska, Hawaii, or the island territories, are represented in the blue text. And not really interested in you reading all this, but just to understand the scope of what has been delivered in the 15 years that the Landfire program has been working. So the last column on the right you'll see is remap, and it's pretty much blank now except for topographic layers you'll see at the bottom, because we have not completed a major geography yet. We have not completed the continental US. That is still a few months off. And when that happens, we will start to fill in that last column on the right, the remap. So where are we now in a remap? Okay, it is important to remember that this is a recreation of spatial products. It is not an update of the previous versions. So it is a new product, and that could confound your comparisons a bit. And that's why I suggest that when you talk to us, if you go to do some kind of comparisons across different versions, that you talk to us so that we can kind of help you understand what may have changed. But what's been delivered so far is the Pacific Northwest, the geographic Southwest, and also the geographic South Central. And this would be the current vegetation layers, that is type, cover, and height, as well as the basic fuels layers, the surface and canopy fuels, have all been delivered for this area here. The north central part of the US, what you see above and to the right, that will be delivered probably within the next month. I would say the vegetation and fuels layers will be delivered for that part of the country. Now, there are still some layers that have not been delivered yet for any part of the continental US. Those are what we call the fire regime and condition layers. We're going to do those continental wide when all the veg and fuels production is done for the continent. So you'll have to wait on those. That will be sometime next late spring or so. The fire regime and condition layers will be developed across the entire country. And by the way, the question has been asked, do we have data mosaics? We do not have data mosaics yet available. You still have to download using the data viewer that we have. When the continent is done, we will create data mosaics where you can download the entire continent at one time. So in Remap, what has remained the same? Well, it's the same design constraints: comprehensive, compatible, consistent, and current. That is the same. That has not changed. The basic product suite is the same, pardon me. And again, there are some changes to processes and thematic content intended to improve product usability, but the basic product suite is the same. Okay? What has not changed as well is that Landfire products should be considered a large landscape, regional, national data set as delivered out of the box. It is not delivered out of the box intending to represent local conditions precisely, okay? Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't represent local conditions necessarily, or that it's no good at all for local conditions. It just means that you need to review it, and you may need to make changes to it to represent local conditions well enough to use for a local application. It is a large landscape, regional, national data set as delivered. That is the same as in previous versions. So what is new in LANDFIRE Remap? Some of these new processes and content I mentioned. Well, instead of using National Land Cover Database map zones as the geographic framework for mapping, we now use OMERNIC, which are like EPA, Environmental Protection Agency type zones, the OMERNIC Level 3 zone, which has more ecological relevancy, which we think makes the mapping better. It improves our mapping to use that as our framework rather than the map zones. We also have new imagery techniques that we're using to composite images across years, also across space, tiling, masking methods. The bottom line here is we have a better base set of imagery to use for the mapping processes than we had originally. We also have new auto keys and improved auto keys because LANDFIRE and all good mapping projects use field reference plots as the basis for the mapping, and LANDFIRE has more than 1 million plots in its database. We have to assign categories to those plots, and the way we do that is through what's called an auto key, sort of like an automated dichotomous key that reads in the field plot information and assigns an existing vegetation type to it, either an ecological system or an NVC group. We had some problems with those auto keys in the original LANDFIRE, so we actually undertook a project over the past few years to actually review and improve those auto keys for assigning vegetation types to field plots. We also have new Landsat imagery, Landsat 8 imagery, which is a newer, probably better imaging platform that we use. It also gives us additional years of imagery. So we not only have better imagery, we have more imagery. We call those image stacks. An important process that we included this time, because we had the ability to do so, was an external review of the existing vegetation type legend and draft products before they were ever delivered. They went through an internal review where we identified issues, problems, things that we could fix, and actually did that before the products were ever delivered. We were not able to do that in the original version of LANDFIRE. We also now have added a new product. It's sort of a new product. It's an independently mapped NVC group product for the existing vegetation type. And we delivered NVC group before in LANDFIRE in the existing vegetation type, but only as a crosswalked attribute from ecological systems. In this case, we actually independently mapped NVC group, which is important because using NVC is in theory a mandate for many projects and agencies. So we are trying to deliver that as a useful product now. What else is new is we have over the years acquired many more field plots than we had previously, which again support the mapping processes. And importantly, they're more diverse. We were able to enter in with memorandum of understandings with NRCS to obtain their natural resource inventory plots, which really focus on private land. And we were also able to get access to the Bureau of Land Management assessment, inventory, and monitoring plots, which filled a gap that we had in some of the shrubland types in particular. So we have more field plots, a more thematically diverse set of field plots than we had in the past. We were able to incorporate LiDAR data sets to improve the thematic resolution of structure products. Structure products are things like ground cover and height or canopy cover and height. So we were able to use LiDAR in parts of the country to improve the resolution of those products and likely the precision and accuracy as well. Another data set we were able to incorporate, or a process we could incorporate, were the National Land Cover Database Continuous Shrub Cover Mapping Project. They undertook a project to really look at how we're mapping cover in shrublands. And so we were able to incorporate what they did into LANDFIRE as well. Over the past few years, we've undertook a review of the biophysical settings, models, and descriptions. These are pre-European settlement, state and transition models for every major ecosystem in the US. And we did review those, and we did make a lot of changes, and those will be delivered when the fire regime layers are delivered later next year. And sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. New products that were actually created for this particular version, or we actually have an historic disturbance layer now, which not only has the last disturbance that occurred, but a 10-year record of disturbance that occurred on each pixel as mapped by LANDFIRE. So that's an extension of what we've delivered in the past. And then also we have a new product called called year capable fuels products. So Remap is called 2016 because we represent landscape conditions as of the end of 2016 calendar year. But in the fuels products, in disturbed areas, we were able to use a process to actually move those 2016, if we want to think of it that way, surface fuel products to 2019, so that when we deliver fuels products in disturbed areas, they represent conditions that are more current than we were able to do in the past. And finally, we have a new backwardly compatible fire regime group schema. Fire regime group was an important sort of categorical variable used to describe fire regimes in the past. We had a 5-category group. LANDFIRE did not develop that, but we implemented what was available at the time. And what we've learned is that the resolution of that old schema is not really sufficient. So we undertook a project with Wendell Hahn and some others to actually look at how we could refine that fire regime group schema. So what we did was we actually took the original 5 groups on the left, the Roman numeral 1 through 5, and we actually subdivided them using a cluster analysis that Wendell performed, and we subdivided their historic fire return intervals, which you'll see on the right. So instead of fire regime group 1 going from 0 to 35 year all fire return interval, it now is split into 3 groups, 0 to 5, 6 to 15, 16 to 35, providing a little bit more information about the historic fire regime group, which again will be delivered at the time that the fire regime layers are delivered later next year. So you see, we're trying to provide a little bit more information, but still be backwardly compatible with the past. So if you needed to look at the past, you could. So let's talk a little bit about the quality of the products. And so what's been delivered so far are, again, the veg and fuels layers. We have undertaken a quantitative assessment of the EVT, which is our jargon for existing vegetation type. And we have assessed the quality of the ecological systems product, the NVC group, the NVC macro group, and also a commonly used cover type product, the SAF SRM cover type product. So we undertook an assessment of those using plots that were withheld from the mapping analysis. So they are independent plots. I think it was about 12,000 or so in the Southwest GeoArea that we withheld. I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like that. We're not used in the mapping that you then compare back against the products to see how well you actually mapped that particular pixel. And it's a little bit difficult, you know, because LANDFIRE is considered to be a large landscape national regional scale product, but we do report a pixel by pixel accuracy quality as best we can using the plot databases that we have. Our plot distribution is not fantastic. If we had unlimited funds and we had unlimited time, we could do a better job of assessing these things, but we use what we have to do the assessment. And we provide a traditional contingency table, and we provide also some other tables, which I'll describe in a moment. But a contingency table is basically a plot to pixel comparison of what LANDFIRE mapped it as versus what the withheld independent plot said it was. So you'll see, in this case, the rows represent LANDFIRE map, the columns represent the plots, and you'll see, for instance, that 186 plots that were Rocky Mountain aspen forest and woodland in the plot database were actually mapped as Rocky Mountain aspen forest and woodland. That is a traditional contingency table. The issue with the contingency table is it gets a little bit hard to use because in the Southwest GeoArea, LANDFIRE mapped 202 different types. Ecological systems, in this case, ecological systems. So it's kind of hard to interpret something that's 202 rows by 202 columns. That can be a little bit difficult. The yellow here represents correct classifications. That is a match between plot and an image or map product. but it's really hard to get good information out of that. So we created a separate table, which I'll show you in a moment. But the important thing to remember about this is that sometimes people don't use a bare ecological systems classification or NVC group or macro group. We also provide an example of how you can collapse this contingency table into the category system that you used, as long as it does collapse one-to-one. In other words, say multiple LANDFIRE ecological systems collapse to one ecological system that you're using or some type. So if you can do that, then you can use this example to help guide you, okay, to how you collapse to get quality information on the particular category system that you are using, not just the ones that LANDFIRE has provided. So to help this interpretation, we also created a category agreement table that looks like this, where each row represents a type mapped by LANDFIRE. We only put values in here if we had 30 plots to do the assessment, and many of them don't. But if it did, you'll see a row in here for it, and it represents the ecological system as well as the number of percent of the pixels, which is sort of like a proxy for how prevalent it is on the landscape. And then also what we would call the agreement. So in the case of the second line there, 7114, you'll see that the agreement between LANDFIRE map product and field plots that were that type was 59.84%, 60%. The important thing to me is not the number. Yes, it is good to have a high number, but sometimes you will use a different system than we will in order to use this assessment. You can see that the three major types of errors that were created by LANDFIRE are in the next three columns. So 22 pixels in that second row were classified by LANDFIRE as California rural forest. There were 22 of those. There were 9 that were called northern and central. So you can actually use this table to see what kinds of errors that LANDFIRE made. This is in the contingency table. It's just a lot easier to find here than it would have been in the contingency table. All these products have been provided to you. They are available for download for each of the geo areas that LANDFIRE has delivered: Pacific Northwest, Southwest, South Central. You can find these products. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. We hope to have time in the future to do an assessment of cover and height. They're different animals, so it takes a different process to do them, and we're going to do those at the end of the continental US and the major geography. So we've not done that yet, and we hope to actually sort of determine a way that we can assess the fire behavior fuel model, that which are the surface fuel models. That is another difficult process because we don't really have a good comparison to say right or wrong, so we're trying to develop a new way to actually describe how accurate the fire behavior fuel model products are. So in the future, we're going to wrap up CONUS by the summer of 2020, and that includes the fire regime layers. Then we're going to move on to Alaska, Hawaii, and the island territories. And that's definitely in the plans. That has been funded. We're going to be doing that. Further beyond that, because remapping is more expensive than updating, we probably will not do another update in the future, certainly not in the near future. So what we're working on is a way to provide more frequent updates. That is, updating the base LANDFIRE 2016 remap product using imagery, events that have been submitted to us like fires, etc., to actually update the products more quickly and provide them to the user more quickly. We're now working on that as a way to continue to try to keep the LANDFIRE products current and usable. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kori, who is going to talk about some of the remap improvements and show examples. Kori, are you able to take control?
Yes.
And I will tell you that Kori is a member of the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team. She is a former hotshot, but is also a fire ecologist. And so she'll be talking about remap improvements. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim, for that introduction. I am going to pick up where Jim left off. He gave you some broad strokes, an overview of the types of improvements and changes you can expect to see in our Remap product. But I'm going to dive in with some real specific examples to talk about how these things really touch down on the ground. In the next few slides, I'm going to highlight improvements to the existing vegetation products. By that, I mean existing vegetation type, cover, and height. I've chosen to focus on these products because they are foundational for LANDFIRE and their inputs into other products such as the fuels products and the succession class data. So improvements in existing veg have wide-reaching effects. So as Jim mentioned previously, the way we process imagery now, for example, using tiling and larger processing units, is going to lead to fewer seam lines in our data. And I think this image here illustrates it really nicely. In the top, you see our existing vegetation cover product in 2014, and you see a real stark change in shrub cover at a map zone boundary. In Remap, in the lower picture, you see that the cover doesn't change so abruptly. We're also making improvements to the way we map shrub cover that we think has improved the product. So we are incorporating the National Land Cover Data Set's continuous shrub cover product. That's based on very high resolution imagery, and we've incorporated it into Remap to improve our mapping. Here you can see on the right an area where in the National Land Cover Dataset, or NLCD, in kind of that light tan cover, an area of shrub cover, but in the middle image in 2014, we mapped it as herbaceous cover. Well, now in the remap shown on the right, we've got it correctly identified as shrub, and that's through this incorporation of the finer continuous shrub cover product from NLCD. So in arid areas like a lot of the Southwest and the Great Basin, we're doing a better job of identifying low shrub cover using this new methodology. You're also going to see some changes in the way we map in disturbed areas that we think better represents what you're actually going to see on the ground post-disturbance. On the far right here, again, you see the NLCD product, and there's a distinct burn scar in the middle of that image. So in NLCD, this is mapped as shrub cover. But in the 2014 LANDFIRE product, that same area is mapped as California montane woodland and chaparral. But in the Remap product shown on the left, we've incorporated our information about disturbances. And so we've changed the way this is mapped, and we're now classifying it as a recently burned area. So it's recently burned shrub cover. Well, it may still be that California montane woodland and chaparral existing vegetation type, it's actually shrub cover on the ground right now. So we think that by incorporating this disturbance information, you're going to get a better idea of what's actually on the ground today. You're going to see some changes to the legend in the new Remap product, and one area where the legend has changed and is actually going to provide more resolution in types is for systems that were previously aggregated. So before, we had these aggregate types for riparians and wetlands as well as barren. In the slide here on the right in 2014, you're seeing one aggregated riparian type, the riparian forest and woodland. But on the left in the Remap product, you see how that one type is actually split out into three finer classes. So again, you'll see a similar change in the barren types, where instead of just seeing barren in the Remap product, you're going to see classes like bedrock and scree or playa. You're going to get more information about what's actually on the ground. In Remap, we're also making an effort to improve the mapping of individual existing vegetation types. In previous LANDFIRE versions, we think that the greasewood flat type was possibly overmapped and mapped on higher slope positions where other shrub types may have been more appropriate. In the center image here, you see how we mapped it in 2014. And then in Remap, that's really been refined and it's been restricted to lower slope locations. In Remap, we've made a big effort to improve the mapping of invasive species, which is particularly important for your region of the world, the Southwest and the Great Basin. Here you can see a comparison of our Remap EVT product and our updated 2014 product compared to this annual herbaceous cover product. And you can see that the Remap product aligns more closely with that near real-time annual herbaceous cover product. One of the big changes you're going to see in the height and cover data for Remap is that we're now delivering continuous classes. Previously, the data were binned. If you looked at our cover data before, you would have seen data binned into 10% cover classes. For height, it was binned into something like 5 classes for forest, 4 for shrub, 3 for herb. So broad classes. Now you're getting a lot more detail in the legend. In fact, what you see here is only partial legends because there's too much detail to display and still have you be able to read it on this slide. Taking a closer look, this is the continuous height cover product. In 2014, on the left, you see that there's 2 dominant height classes represented by 2 different shades of green. And then on the right, in the Remap product, you see all this speckling in the data and many different shades of green representing that fine scale variation in height on the landscape. In addition to working on all of the spatial products that LANDFIRE produces and delivers, we've made a big effort to improve and update the biophysical settings, models, and descriptions. These models and descriptions are used in LANDFIRE to estimate reference conditions. They're used to map vegetation condition class and also to map the fire regime products. Back in 2015, we initiated a review of this product suite. And the goal of that effort was to update the models and data, or models and descriptions with new science. We also tried to improve the succession class mapping rules by completing them. And if you're familiar with the vegetation condition class calculation, you'll know that the mapping of succession classes is a very important component of that. So by improving the succession class mapping rules, we think there will be improvements in the vegetation condition class mapping. Once this product is delivered, you'll see that we've made an effort to improve the description document as well as provide a new, more user-friendly data access website. We made a special effort as part of this review to get input on some major Western rangeland types. And I think, again, given our geographic focus here today, this is particularly important. In the map here, you can see 4 different vegetation types that were part of what we call a macro review. And that was an effort to look at the logical consistency between models for really widespread systems. So for example, we mapped the Intermountain Basin's big sagebrush shrubland across nearly 52 million acres in the West, so really widespread system. And for that system, we created 12 unique biophysical settings models to represent it throughout its range. We felt it was important to review all those models as a set to try to refine and improve them. So when we looked at those models as a set, we asked ourselves some key questions like, do these models encompass the full range of variability we see across the range of the type? Do the models accurately reflect ecological differences? So using questions like that as our guide, we tried to refine these really widespread shrubland systems. So we made many improvements to the biophysical settings, not just those 4 shrub types that I showed, but all the biophysical settings were available for review and many were improved. I'll illustrate the types of changes you might expect using one example. Again, going back to that big sagebrush shrubland, and here looking at the model that applies to the Great Basin and Southwest. So during the review, we got feedback from a group of Nature Conservancy scientists that indicated that our original model encompassed a lot of variability and would probably be more useful to land managers if it were divided into two distinct types. An upland type that got more rain and supported trees and had more frequent fire versus a semi-desert type which had less rain, couldn't support trees, and was subject to a less frequent fire regime. So we tried to incorporate those differences now into two distinct models where there was only one previously. When the models are available, which will probably be when the fire regime products are delivered around summer of 2020, you'll see that the data will be available in a new searchable user interface. The Alaska models are still being finalized, and we'll deliver those when they're complete. All right, so LANDFIRE creates a lot of data, but we do that in the hopes that it will be useful. So to wrap up here, I want to end with an application of LANDFIRE data. Today I'm going to highlight the Rio Grande Water Fund effort, which is a project in New Mexico to protect municipal water supplies. This is a project between the Nature Conservancy and its partners. And as part of this, they developed a plan to describe current wildfire threats to water resources and then prioritize where treatments would help reduce wildfire impacts such as post-fire erosion. LANDFIRE spatial data were key to several aspects of the analysis that was done as part of this plan. And they were particularly useful because they were all ready to go and current, covering the entire analysis area. LANDFIRE fuels data were used in the wildfire risk assessment, which is one portion of the analysis that they did. So those fuels data were used in FlamMap to model potential fire behavior. The wildfire risk assessment then became part of this focal areas analysis. And on the map here, you see the focal areas analysis and how it was used to identify areas where water supplies were at risk. So on the map, areas in need of restoration treatment to protect water supplies are shown in red, and areas with a lower need for treatment are shown in the green tones. This focal areas map can be used to allocate water funds to areas where the risk to the water supply is greatest and where restoration actions have the highest probability of success. All right, so take-home messages here to wrap it up. I want to just circle back to where Jim started. LANDFIRE data are specifically designed to be comprehensive, compatible, consistent, and current. That's part of what makes LANDFIRE data so useful, but users need to bear in mind that the data are really designed for regional and national scale uses. We like to help support users who are interested in modifying and calibrating the data for local use, and you'll find a number of resources to support data modification on our various websites that I'll show in our final slide. The LANDFIRE Remap product has incorporated a lot of new processes and data which we think have improved the usability of those products. And going forward, if you have feedback to provide to the LANDFIRE team or have plots and data to support future mapping efforts, there are links to provide that kind of information on our website. So here are some ways to provide feedback through email or a contact us link on the website. You can also reach out to Jim or I directly through our emails. And we have a number of online resources to get information about the project. There's landfire.gov, which is probably the place to start and provides access to the data as well as a lot of information about the individual products. On the Nature Conservancy's Conservation Gateway site about LANDFIRE, we provide user support information and a lot of information about the ways LANDFIRE data have been used and applied. We're on Twitter. We have videos online to support the use of the products, as well as other information like the webinar we're doing today will be posted there eventually. We also have a postcard that you can opt into, and you can contact us at landfire@tnc.org if you want to contact us directly via email. So with that, I will stop talking. We have about 10 minutes left, and we'd love to take your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Kori, and Jim, thank you too. Great presentation. It's interesting. I thought I knew a lot about LANDFIRE. I use it fairly often, and I learned a lot. So I appreciate you guys coming on here. There are a couple of questions that came into the chat window, and maybe more coming here. So feel free, if you're listening, go ahead and type your questions into the chat window. And we have enough people on the line that I'll probably keep the lines muted just because it keeps the channel more clear. So the first question came in about geology and the inclusion of geologic information in the remap. Kori or Jim, do either of you want to talk about that?
I'll try to address that. I'm not sure that geology was directly incorporated, and not quite involved in all the production streams, so I could be wrong about this, but certainly elements such as soil properties are involved, which would normally, I think, come from Surgo, which is where I think LANDFIRE would get soil properties. But I'm not strictly knowledgeable about geology, you know, rock types and things like that, about how they might have been incorporated. We did use certain physiographic variables through all the processes, through the mapping of biophysical settings, which is pre-European settlement vegetation. So there might have been some geology in that, but that was, I was not involved in the mapping of that, so I'm not sure. And then some of these one-off like soil properties, but I don't remember like a geology map per se, quote unquote, or geology data set being a part of the production process, but I can certainly check on that to make sure I'm correct.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Larry actually had another question in here as well about the U.S. Forest Service National Hierarchical Framework of Ecological Units, and whether, and I mean, I guess it's sort of water under the bridge now, but the choice between that and the Omeric ecoregions. And I was thinking that maybe, given that, you know, that's the way it's mapped currently, if there's any advice that either of you have about crosswalking or ability to kind of think about those regional boundaries that other agencies like the Forest Service might use.
Well, I do remember discussing several different kinds of frameworks, and I don't remember the specific reasons for why Omernic was chosen. I would be purely speculating about why that was chosen. I do know that we have used things like land type associations, provinces, sections, etc., when we were working specifically with national forests, like the Wayne National Forest or the Hiawatha National Forest or the some of the Sierra, etc. We will sometimes work in those frameworks by translating the data or by doing some sort of crosswalk. So we have done that. It is doable. I would have to go look at the actual comparison of the Omernic versus the provinces and sections, etc., because I don't remember doing that, but I have a feeling there's some correspondence there since they're all ecologically driven. But I would have to go check to make sure that's the case, to see if they nest well or don't nest well. But I do know that we've been able to use local classifications of the landscape, as well as some of these standard classifications like Bailey's subsections and things like that. So it's probably, we probably have to talk on a case-by-case basis to answer the question specifically. So sorry, I can't tell you why Omernic was chosen in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And I know from, it seems like the new tiling and other improvements softening or reducing this contrast between different units, seems like that actually makes a big difference in terms of how users with different boundaries might be affected by boundary choices, because it seems like now there's less of a stark difference, so
Yeah.
the boundaries don't matter as much.
Yeah, seam lines do exist, but they have been, I think, reduced in impact
Yeah.
using the new methods.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting, I think, because that always, as a former cartographer, that always makes you a little nervous when you're presenting maps that have those seam lines. But let's see, Sarah had a question about the kinds of disturbance that are included in the historic disturbance product.
Okay. A quick background: the way disturbance is created is basically through two processes. One of them is the compiling of databases of what we might call events or disturbances wherever we can find them, which would be things like NIFPURs from the Department of the Interior, facts from the Department of Agriculture. Anybody that wants to send us a polygon of an event, or in the case of like the Nature Conservancy where I work, we will send them prescribed fire locations and things like that. So we compile all that data that's sent to us, okay? And that's what, however you would, whatever kind of disturbance you want to send in. Normally it's things like wildfire, prescribed fire, insect and disease attacks, wind events like hurricanes or tornadoes or blowdowns, things like that. But it's whatever kind of disturbance that you want. Landfire will categorize those into a few generalized categories. For instance, Landfire might call clear felling and thinning all mechanical remove. So you've removed potential vegetation and fuel from the site through a mechanical process. A thinning might be a low severity mechanical remove, whereas a clear fill might be a high severity mechanical remove. Same for fire or any other kind of disturbance. So we'll take any kind of disturbance and we'll classify it. And you can find the particular classifications in the metadata of the product, exactly how we do that and what they are. But in addition to what we compile, we also do an image search. So we will look for landscape changes using satellite imagery. We can use the ones that were sent to us as sort of training spots, and we'll look for other places where disturbances occurred and try to assign a causality and a severity to them using imagery. We will use modeling trends in burn severity and other kinds of databases that we can find, but think of it as mining event or disturbance information, categorizing it, and then doing the same with image-based change products and trying to categorize them. And that's how we create the historic disturbance product.
Jim, just while you were talking, I switched over to landfire.gov and brought up the data dictionary associated with our annual vegetation disturbance products. You get an idea of what Jim's talking about here, how we categorize disturbances into different types, and importantly, include some estimate of the severity.
Yeah,
Sorry, I hope that answered your question. If not, certainly follow up with us.
I think we're coming up to the top of the hour. We probably have a time for one more question if somebody wants to type it in or speak up. I guess maybe this is too long a question for the last question, but I can't resist asking if, so I sit here in New Mexico, we do lots of project work and things like writing community wildfire protection plans. It's Landfire all the time. And if I were to be working with a county, say, so fairly large enough area where Landfire might make sense, and I were to, once the remap is available and I'm using that and looking back at past Landfire editions, I understand that one needs to be careful about just doing a one-to-one comparison. And you mentioned that getting in touch with Landfire to do those sorts of comparisons. but is there a quick like heuristic rule of thumb for don't even make any comparisons, or you know, these kinds of comparisons might be appropriate? Do you have any kind of rough guidance for that sort of thing, or is that just a bad question?
Well, I can give it a try because I have been thinking about this and working on it. I don't have a good general answer because, as with most things like this, it's probably going to be different in New Mexico than it is in Northern California. Okay. But I would say I think comparisons are valid. The longer the time frame that you use in the comparison is better than a shorter comparison. So comparing 2 years of change, I don't expect a lot of change, frankly, okay? I do expect comparing Remap to previous versions to be a fairly good comparison because we made some good changes to the processes, but I don't think that they invalidate the idea of comparing them. I just think we have to take the comparisons and look at them and say, do I think that's due to a process change or a change in the landscape? That is something, because we can look at it specifically how, for instance, vegetation cover was mapped now versus in the past, and say, well, you know, you've got a 6% change in cover according to this, but you know, we were mapping in 10% classes before, Xander. So that's a pretty weak comparison.
That's
But
great.
do you see what I mean? It's kind of
Yeah.
like we have to explore the differences to see whether or not I think they're valid or you think they're valid. But I definitely say when we come out with Remap that it is worth comparing. And the longer the time period, the better.
Okay. Thank you. That good. I think that that gives me some way to go forward. And we're at the top of the hour here, so we should probably wrap up. I want to thank you guys both again. Great presentation. Thanks for packing a lot of information in fashion and getting it out so that those of us who use LANDFIRE and rely on it can know what to look forward to and what to expect when we get on the website. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for participating, and Xander for hosting.
And I'll send out a recording, a link to a recording for everybody, and so you can share it with your colleagues, etc. And hope you're able to join us on a future webinar. With that, I'll close things off. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.